Okay, I think we should be starting now. Okay, let me give a short introduction to Professor Pankaj Jain. He has been teaching at IIT Kanpur for the past quarter of a century, and he works in astrophysics and particle physics. He got into the field of low energy nuclear reactions about 2 years ago, and he has been trying to understand LNR from the first principles. So today he will be telling us about how deuterons interact with heavy nuclei, which is very important in trying to understand transmutation reactions. And we believe that he has been successful in this. Over to Pankaj. Pankaj, you may start.
Thanks, Rajiv. I'm here. Okay. So thank you for the introduction and thanks everyone for joining. So let me share my screen. So just 1 minute. So is my screen visible?
Yes, Pankaj, it is visible.
Okay, so let me begin. So I'll talk about low energy reaction of a deuteron with a heavy nucleus. Work I've done with Harisham Kumar, Ram Kumar, Ankit Kumar, Rajpala, and KP Rajiv. So first, a brief introduction on low energy nuclear reactions. At low energies, nuclear fusion is strongly suppressed due to Coulomb repulsion. Yet, there are many claims that such reactions take place in condensed matter medium. In recent 2 papers, actually, we proposed that this might happen by formation of a short-lived virtual state. This has also been proposed earlier by Kalman and Sesteli in PhysRev C 2019. The question is, does it really work? The theoretical formalism is that we need to use second-order time-dependent perturbation theory. So we need to have at least 2 perturbations or vertices. In the earlier work, we considered the fusion of hydrogen with deuteron. This is one of the simplest fusion reactions. So we studied this particular reaction in which hydrogen undergoes fusion with deuteron, formation of helium-3 with the emission of 2 photons. So 2 photons have to be emitted due to the fact that there are 2 perturbations. This is somewhat similar to the standard fusion process, which is applicable in astrophysics, which proceeds at first order in perturbation theory, in which hydrogen fuses with deuteron to form helium-3 with the emission of gamma. So since only one gamma, this can happen at first order. The important problem, of course, that many of you know is that in order for such fusion processes to take place, the particles need to come within a distance of about 10 to the minus 12 centimeter for the nuclear force to start acting. At large distances, you have, for example, a proton and a deuteron. There's a strong Coulomb repulsion between them. There's a Coulomb potential. And if the energy is low, the potential is strongly repulsive, and the possibility that the reaction can take place is very, very small. Here, this is the Coulomb potential. So although we have a positive Q value, because of the Coulomb repulsion, the process cannot take place unless the initial energy is sufficiently high, or the process is strongly suppressed. In second-order perturbation theory, there is a hope or a possibility that the Coulomb barrier could be overcome by invoking high-energy intermediate states. In such a theory, you actually get contributions from all eigenstates, although these contributions are suppressed by some power of the energy difference, but yet that suppression is not that strong. So there is some possibility that we may be able to overcome the Coulomb barrier. So the idea is the following. This diagram is actually thanks to Manoj Herbola. So we have a transition through a virtual state. So here I show the initial state. E3 is the final state. So E3 has a very low energy compared to the initial state, but this cannot proceed directly because there is a Coulomb barrier. So it perhaps proceeds by making a transition to a high energy state, and which then decays into a low energy state. So this state, of course, has to be virtual and short-lived. However, by detailed calculation, what we found was that despite invoking a high energy virtual state, we found that the reaction rate at low initial energies is negligible, is quite small in free space. However, we argued, in fact, I'll explain what the problem was. I'll explain that later on. However, in condensed medium, such reactions may be observable. That is what we argued in our paper. There are some special conditions, and if they are met, then these reactions may be observable. Essentially, we require special medium wave functions, which may be possible in medium. We sort of speculated that, but we did not give a complete mathematical description since that was quite elaborate. We could not quite do that as yet. In the current work, we have been looking at the reaction of deuteron with a heavy nucleus. So we study the process in which deuteron undergoes reaction with a heavy nucleus, which we denote as X, and it has atomic weight A, atomic mass A. This guy, so deuteron is a bound state of a proton and a neutron. So X captures a neutron and goes into XA plus 1 with the emission of a proton plus some other particles, which we denote as Y. So Y can be a range of final products, and we consider two possibilities. We have considered only this possibility, where it is just two photons. The key difference in this process and the earlier process that we considered was that in this case is the neutron that gets captured, which has no charge. So it is not a charged particle which undergoes fusion. It's a neutron that gets captured. So the key difference is that neutron does not feel the Coulomb repulsion, and the process is possible even if the neutron energy is small. In the earlier case, we needed a very high energy proton, intermediate state, sorry. In the intermediate state, we needed a high energy state in order for the fusion to take place. In this case, the intermediate state can have relatively low energy, and even then the process can take place. But I'll explain this in more detail soon. We will show that this process leads to a small but observable rate without requiring any special wave functions. Earlier we had to require a special medium wave function, whose mathematical description was a bit difficult. But in this one, we don't require that. So here's a schematic. We have an initial state, we have a deuteron and a heavy nucleus. At the first vertex, the deuteron forms a virtual state of a neutron and a proton with the emission of a photon. The heavy particle just goes right through. It just acts as a potential for the proton or the deuteron nucleus. At the second vertex, the neutron gets captured by emission of another photon, and the proton just goes away as a free particle, and we have a formation of a nucleus state with A plus 1 atomic mass. So the process proceeds in two steps or vertices. First, the deuteron forms a virtual state of a proton and a neutron. The neutron gets absorbed by the nucleus X. And the second step is that the neutron gets absorbed by the nucleus X. We are interested in low energies of order EV. So we do not have enough energy to break up D into P and N. However, energy need not be conserved at each vertex. We only need overall energy momentum conservation. This is well known. Hence, D can form a virtual proton plus neutron state, which exists for a short time interval of order h bar over delta E. In this short time interval, neutron may get absorbed by the nucleus X. Here I just want to make some general comments, which people have a tendency to, get confused about. Although energy need not be conserved at each vertex, momentum must be conserved if we deal with free particles, with free particle states. That is momentum eigenstates. In our case, however, this is going to be an important point actually. In our case, we have particles in a potential, and hence these are not momentum eigenstates. So the effective momentum conservation that we have is more complicated. It simply does not work in the way that I've stated in the first line. In high energy particle physics, this concept of virtual states is actually standard, but they implement it differently. There, they develop a different formalism in which both energy and momentum are conserved at each vertex. So in contrast to us, where energy is conserved but momentum need not be energy is not conserved but momentum is conserved, they actually impose both energy and momentum conservation at each vertex. However, they do not impose the standard mass on mass shell relation. So E is equal to P square C square plus M square C to the power 4 to the power 1/2 is not implemented. Of course, here we are not dealing with relativity, relativistic particles, we are dealing with non-relativistic particles, but in our case, we will be enforcing this relationship, at least its non-relativistic version at each point. All particles will be respecting this condition. Now, the point is that there exists what's known as old-fashioned perturbation theory, which in fact, the high energy physicists that I know of have collectively forgotten. So that's why they argue about this particular formalism. In the old-fashioned perturbation theory, this was actually strictly enforced. So this condition was strictly enforced without requiring energy conservation at each vertex. So these two are equivalent. Enforcing energy momentum conservation and not imposing this on mass shell relationship, or we enforce this mass shell relation and momentum conservation and not require energy conservation are both equivalent. This is explained in, for example, standard textbooks like Hazen and Martin. So we come back to the deuteron heavy nucleus reaction. For definiteness, we'll consider a particular heavy nucleus, which will be nickel 58, which has Z28N30. We'll look at the process in which nickel 58 absorbs a neutron to go into nickel 59 by absorbing a neutron. We assume transition to the ground state, although transitions to many states is possible. We have not considered that just for simplicity. The corresponding state in this case is 3p 3/2. So this is L equal to 1. The binding energy is 9 MeV. The binding energy of deuteron is 2.2 MeV. So therefore, the Q value, that is the energy released in the process, would be roughly 7 MeV. So now we split the Hamiltonian into unperturbed part H0 and perturbation Hi, as given here. The formalism is straightforward. We obtain eigenstates of H0 and use second order time dependent perturbation theory to compute transitions between these eigenstates. So here is the standard formula taken from standard texts. The transition amplitude at second order is given by this. Here is the initial state. Here is the final state. So we have first the overlap of the initial state with the interaction Hamiltonian with the intermediate state. And then there is integral over time. Then again, the overlap of the intermediate state with the final state. And then you have to sum up over all the intermediate eigenstates. So the sum over intermediate eigenstates extends over all energies up to infinity. So that is where the hope that we can probe high energy states and perhaps make a transition. The unperturbed Hamiltonian in our case is the kinetic energy of proton, the kinetic energy of neutron, the kinetic energy of the X particle, and the potential energy, which is a bit complicated. For simplicity, we will treat this particle X as a point particle and not probe its internal structure, okay? And we'll use shell model potential to compute the bound state wave function of X with neutron. So X is just a potential source in which neutron gets captured. So X just acts as a source of potential for neutron capture. The potential consists of the nuclear potential between proton and neutron and between neutron and X, along with the screened Coulomb potential between the charged particles. For deuteron, we use a textbook square well potential. For the interaction Hamiltonian, we take the electromagnetic coupling in which the vector potential gets coupled to the particle momenta, and we have the spin coupling to the magnetic field. This is a magnetic moment coupling. So we'll use this one to look at the capture of neutron in the heavy nucleus. So B is the magnetic field. The initial state consists of the X particle, wave function of the X particle, and the wave function of the deuteron. X is heavy, so we'll ignore recoil. That can be included also, but that I think is not important. So psi X will not play any role because we are also simply ignoring its internal structure. The deuteron wave function, we can split into the center of mass variables and the relative variables. So the deuteron bound state wave function has L equal to 0, S equal to 1. We'll ignore L equal to 2. And we assume that the deuteron, it's a low energy deuteron, so it just forms a molecular bound state with X. And we assume a Gaussian wave function for center of mass dependence, a spherically symmetric Gaussian wave function. So here is the geometry. We have X located at the origin. We have the proton and neutron at positions R1 and R2. This is the relative momentum. This is center of mass momentum. Initial state, they form a bound state. In the intermediate states, they form free eigenstates. And then in the final state, proton gets emitted, neutron gets captured. So as I already said, the center of mass wave function, we can explicitly solve by assuming a molecular potential, but it will give you something of this type, where I've assumed a typical bond length for, this is just a Gaussian peak at R0 with a small width delta. So typical bond length is about 3.5 units. This is in atomic units. Actually, it's like for deuterium, it should be smaller than this, in fact. So this will be somewhat conservative. So we assume a S wave, L equal to 0 wave function, and delta is small. So the key point is that the wave function has to be very strongly decaying as R center of mass goes to 0. Okay, so this wave function should be practically negligible out here. And this choice implements that nicely. Okay, so this is like exponential of more than 100, minus 100 in that region. So that is sufficient for us. In any case, we'll simply cut out the region. We will not even include the contributions from that region. So the first interaction, the deuteron emits a photon and forms an intermediate state of free proton and neutron with L equal to 1. And we take this as our interaction Hamiltonian. So only the proton contributes. We have assumed that the photon has sufficiently low energy so that we can ignore the recoil of the proton due to this. This can be included. In fact, we are including it, and that will change results slightly, not qualitatively. So the first vertex, we have this matrix element, integral over T prime with this exponential. So this is the Hamiltonian, interaction Hamiltonian, and this is what we find. Okay, you have to compute this nuclear matrix element. This is sort of standard, and we find this energy denominator. And this is basically the suppression factor because of the fact that we are violating energy. So the other factors are straightforward. You get a dependence on this sort of arbitrary initial time variable, which has to be set to -infinity. And as explained in standard text, this term is droppable. This will not contribute because the perturbation is assumed to be negligible at very large initial minus negative infinity times. If there are any questions, please feel free to stop. So this leads to a power suppression of the amplitude, but this power suppression is not as stringent as the exponential suppressions that we find otherwise due to Coulomb repulsion, or if we'll find if we have violation of momentum, for example, a strong violation of momentum. So we need to compute this quantity now. And here I've given some details about the angular momentum. We have an intermediate state which consists of free proton and neutron of all energies ranging from E0 to infinity, with the relative contributions decreasing as 1 by delta E, where delta E is the difference of energies. So in this state, because we are emitting a photon, we need L equal to 1 to conserve angular momentum. The spin does not change, so S is still 1. So this gives you J 0, 1, 2, 3. These are the possible states that can contribute. I won't go into all the details of this. And I just want to say that here in this computation, I want to restrict myself to order of magnitude calculations. So we don't have to go into every single gory detail of angular momentum conservation. We can simply take some initial state and some chosen final state and see whether the transition has significant amplitude or not. That will be sufficient. Including everything will simply change that by a factor of 2 or 3. And those factors of 2 or 3 or even 10 are not relevant out here. We are really trying to find a factor of 10 to the minus 100 or 10 to the minus 200 compared to 10 to the minus 20. So that is what I want to see if I can get from 10 to the minus 100 down to 10 to the minus 20. So we assume that a photon of frequency omega 1 is emitted at the first vertex, and we take its direction to be theta 1, phi 1 in spherical polar coordinates. Its polarization vectors are given by this. These are linear polarization vectors. So as I said, we can just consider a particular final state. So we consider only epsilon 2. That is a bit simple. So then in the intermediate state, if you consider this polarization vector, only LM values 1, 1, 1, minus 1 contribute. This means Y1, 1 and Y1 minus 1 contribute. The Y1, 0 does not contribute. Then if you go through the list of states, since the spin and spin magnetic Z quantum number is just 1, 1, only these contribute. Only these eigenstates contribute. If you look at the details of the eigenstates, 2, 2 gets contribution from Y1, 1 and projects out exponential of minus I phi 1 from the polarization vector. All the remaining states which have Z component of spin equal to 0, they get contribution from 1 minus 1 and project out e to the power I phi 1 instead of minus I phi 1 at the first vertex. So basically what that means is that these two do not interfere. So 2, 2 projects exponential of minus I phi 1, remaining states project exponential I phi 1. Hence, these do not interfere. And for an order of magnitude, we focus on just 2, 2, which is a little simpler. A detailed calculation takes a bit more work, but it's not very interesting at this stage. When we want to get to a precision calculation, then we can do it. Right now, I'm only interested in the orders of magnitude. At the first vertex, center of mass coordinates are not relevant if we ignore recoil. Actually, I think recoil should be taken into account unless we restrict ourselves to very low photon momenta. So there is a bit of a limitation, and this we will soon correct. But for low photon momenta, actually, even of the order of 10 keV, this is fine. It's only if you go to 1 MeV or something, or 100 keV also there, I think it starts to break down. So the wave function and the relative coordinates is given by this. So it's just Ui by R, S equal to 1, Ms equal to 1. So this is the initial state, this S wave, this is, and the intermediate state is just the L wave. So the intermediate state is the L wave function. UN is approximately a free particle state, and therefore UN goes to this the spherical Bessel function of 1 times k and r, n is a normalization. So this is the behavior. Now, the complication out here is that so far I have just obtained this wave function as a wave function considering only the proton neutron potential. Okay, there's a question by Srinu. Rajiv, are we taking question right now?
If you don't mind, I think we can take the question.
Yeah, we can take a question. Go ahead.
Okay, hello sir. Actually, that 2-2 state, is it about spin and OAM? Before you have shown 2-2. This.
Yeah, here it is.
Uh,
So it's both spin up and orbital angular momentum up.
okay, if both are on, then it is you are representing 2-2.
Yeah, 2-2. Yeah, this is showing the individual states,
Okay.
the spin
Okay,
and
sir,
orbital
thank
angular
you.
momentum.
Okay, sir, thank you. It is about photon only, right?
No, this is the nuclear state.
Okay.
This is
Okay,
the
sir.
nuclear state.
Okay. Okay,
The
sir.
photon,
Okay,
of
sir.
course, I mean, will take away an angular momentum 1. So therefore, you have to balance that.
Right, right. Okay, sir.
So this is balancing
Okay.
that.
Okay, sir, fine.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay. So, okay. So now this wave function will be significantly modified near the origin. First, because the proton will suffer a Coulomb repulsion. And secondly, as neutron comes very close to the origin, it will also see the nuclear potential, which is actually relevant for us. So we'll come back to this. So this matrix element can be computed straightforwardly. This is standard textbook stuff, okay? So you replace P with R with all these vectors, and then you can compute this matrix element. So there is an angular integral involved out here, which just gives you e to the power minus I phi 1. And then there is this radial integral, which gives you the overlap between the initial and the intermediate eigenstates with R. So I've said that before also, we have assumed the center of mass dependence of the wave function is unchanged, no recoil. This actually we are incorporating. It's also important, but for the time being, it doesn't matter for us too much. This way, as I already said, okay, this will be important for large photon momentum. So this integral I and I as a function of energy is given by this. It's of the order of 5 to 6, 10 to the minus 10, and increases sharply when you increase the energy. But we will actually confine ourselves to low energies, at least for now. So some high energy can also be probed, but that requires a little bit more work. But for low energies, this is fine for us. So this is the kind of values we find. So this integral, so this overlap integral, the first vertex basically takes this particular, sorry. Where am I? Yeah, this value. So now we go to the second vertex. The second vertex involves a neutron capture by X. This can take place by either of the two vertices. The nucleus X can emit a photon and capture the neutron, or the neutron can emit a photon through its magnetic moment coupling and get captured. So either of these is possible, and they are independent of one another. And I have considered only one. I've considered only this particular contribution. So we compute this matrix element of intermediate state with final state, including this particular Hamiltonian given like this. So I've already mentioned this. The next available neutron level in nickel has L equal to 1, J equal to 3/2. We consider this as our final state. And we consider, again, I specify a particular final state, spin up. You can consider spin down also. That's a little bit more work, but it's okay for us to consider just one state for an order of magnitude. The proton spin, there's nothing that flips the proton spin. Since the neutron spin also has been taken to be spin up, the neutron spin also does not flip. So therefore, in the final state also, ms is equal to 1. The spin quantum number is just 1. So therefore, the since the intermediate state also has ms equal to 1, there's no spin flip in this process. We compute the nickel 59 L equal to 1 J3/2 wave function by assuming the shell model potential. We obtained, this is the standard textbook shell model potential. I found a binding energy of 9.2 MeV, which is in good agreement with the listed 9 MeV binding energy for the outermost neutron in this particular nucleus. The final state proton is assumed to be a free particle state. So we take this to be the e to the power I kp dot r. But one has to be cautious out here. The point is that the wave function of proton is strongly modified from free particle wave function due to the Coulomb repulsion. Only at large distances where this Coulomb repulsion may be screened or may become very small is this form relevant. And so at short distances, basically at small r1, we have to very drastically modify this expression. However, the way we'll handle this is that the region where this modification applies will contribute negligibly to our matrix element, as I'll show. And hence, we need not actually be bothered by applying this correction. The proton wave function may also be modified due to the nuclear force of the neutron. But this is relevant only over a very small region when the neutron and proton are very close to one another, and hence this is negligible. So we need not be worried about this either. One can, of course, always do this entire detailed calculation by solving the complete wave function in the presence of both of these potentials. That is an interesting exercise, and I think it's not too difficult. That can be handled with a little bit more work. Something that should be done. So now we look at the second photon. We take its direction to be θ2 phi2. So then the polarization vectors are these. And again, we specify a particular final state. We take epsilon 2 prime to be only this one. We don't compute this one. Don't ignore, we just don't compute it. And this can be handled, for a precision calculation. So we consider this one, and this is our matrix element. Then as we compute, so the relevant for the spin matrix element calculation, this is the operator which is relevant. This becomes equal to this. And once you take its expectation value in the spin states, we get just h bar by 2, k2 sine theta 2. So the second vertex, we can now compute this matrix element. We obtain this dependence on this neutron G factor, the direction of the photon emitted, the photon frequency. And then here, what we have is the intermediate state wave function, the photon wave function, the final state proton, the final state X particle. So this is after it has captured the neutron. And then the integral over the proton and neutron coordinates. As I said, that I'm ignoring recoil of the X particle. This one I think is a very good approximation. We can safely ignore it. So the neutron, the intermediate state wave function is this relative and center of mass wave function. So relative wave function I've already given you before. I've said approximately because in this case, there is some corrections due to this presence of the heavy nucleus, which we have to include. And so this I'll just explain. Actually, I said this out here. Due to presence of X as an origin, psi n may be significantly modified and pick up an explicit dependence on proton and neutron coordinates. So for neutron captured, dominant contributions arises due to small r2. So we're interested in neutron capture process. So this will get dominant contributions when r2 is small of nuclear dimensions. While the proton is strongly repelled by X, and R1 takes values of order atomic unit. So we can neglect R2 prime in comparison to R1 prime. So then our center of mass basically becomes this basically, this prime is just the same thing. R1 and R2 is just R1 prime and R2 prime. So R center of mass is just the proton then by 2, proton coordinate by 2, and R prime is just the proton coordinate because the neutron is now practically at the origin. So psi n, the new intermediate state wave function, is given by this. And this psi center of mass, of course, I already shown you, is now dependent only on the proton coordinates, is strongly suppressed at small r1. The integral, this basically this matrix element out here, because this guy is strongly suppressed at small r1. So therefore, this matrix element gets negligible contribution from this region, from small r1 region. So therefore, we need not worry about the modification of this relative wave function at small r1 prime, because this one suppresses it by itself. The neutron will probe the nuclear potential and will lead to modification of psi n at small r2 prime. So we include the modification of the intermediate state wave function at small r2 prime by setting by a multiplicative factor. So this is just sort of what it's doing is that as a neutron comes close to the heavy nucleus, it feels its potential and its wave function is going to get modified. This psi n is basically that modification. And we know that this will become sinusoidal at large distances. It is very low momenta. So this full wave function at large distances is not relevant to us because the contribution as a function of R2, the contribution for the R2 integral will be relevant only for very small R2. So therefore, we can safely set this equal to 1 for large R2 prime. At large R2 prime, in any case, this function goes to just sine kn R2 prime, and therefore psi n simply becomes 1, and I can, at some point, I can just match it to 1 and just forget about it. So we are interested in kn such that kn R2 prime is much smaller than 1 for nuclear length scales. The correction factor is small and deviates significantly for 1 only for very small kn R2 prime. And this psi n goes to 1 for R2 larger than nuclear dimensions, and we can just set psi n equal to 1 beyond a certain distance. The point I'm making out here is that, as you see, this integral over R2 will be relevant only for nuclear dimensions, and what happens at large distances, I need not worry about it. So this is my matrix element now, with this approximation that this wave function in the intermediate state, R1 prime is much larger than R2 prime. We can just forget R2 prime out here, up to a correction factor, which I've included out here. So with this whole thing decouples. So this one depends only on the proton coordinates, and here is the final state proton wave function. We have this neutron wave function, which depends only on R2. There's a photon emitted, which depends on R2, and the final state X wave function, which depends on R2. So the integral decouples into 2 separate integrals, which is I1 prime. This is the proton integral, and I2 prime, which is the neutron integral. So again, I emphasize that although this modification might make a small contribution at large distance also, I have considered sufficiently low momenta that this is a very small contribution, and for this integral is almost irrelevant. For this integral, it might contribute, but that effect is likely to be very small because of very slow change. So now we first compute this integral over the proton wave function, the matrix element corresponding to the proton. For this, we have this final state proton wave function which is proportional to which is a free wave function proportional to exponential by kp dot r prime. We expand this in spherical harmonics, and with that we can compute this. So we get basically this. So this is the emitted photon coordinates, angular coordinates, and then we get this radial integral given by this thing. So this is essentially, this radial integral is essentially implementing a momentum conservation between the initial two-body state and the final proton and neutron. Now here is one of the interesting things that we noted. What happens is that this is really showing you momentum conservation. If you deal with free particle states, momentum conservation, the way it works is that it picks out a definite momenta. Okay, so all the outgoing states have to have definite momenta. Basically, you get a delta function. You only have to have definite momenta, otherwise there's no contribution. But here the problem is that we are dealing with particles in a potential. So if I were to treat this and ignore the potential, I will also get a delta function out here. But because I'm dealing with particles in a potential, the momentum conservation does not quite work in the way it works for a free particles. In fact, you get that the outgoing state, in this case, the outgoing neutron state, also the outgoing proton state, there's a proton going out, there's a neutron going out, and there's an incoming dn state. Here I'm showing you the wave number, or relative wave number of the proton and neutron in the intermediate state. So although the final proton and neutron that come out have a definite quantum number, definite momenta, you find that you get overlap not from just one momenta, but a range of momenta. And with that, what we find is that even when we, for example, choose a proton energy as low as 2 electron volts. Okay, finally, I have to integrate over the intermediate energies or the intermediate wave numbers. And what I find is that even if the proton energy is simply 2 electron volts, as small as 2 electron volts, this integral over Kn, when I do this integrate this function over Kn, it has a tendency to vanish. This is essentially what happened in the earlier paper. There, we had to deal with Kns which were very large because we're dealing with particles. We needed to have a proton momenta which was quite large in order to overcome the Coulomb barrier. And there was a much stronger tendency for this. Okay, so although momentum conservation does give you large values at some point, at some momenta, but when you sum over all Kn, the entire integral has a tendency to vanish. One can actually try to guess the reason for this, and I'll try to explain a physical reason why that's happening. Interestingly, that will not happen if the proton energy is small. Then you start probing very small intermediate energies, and also the neutron energy now is very small. Then you hit this barrier of Kn equal to 0, and you no longer have this cancellation when you integrate over Kn that we had out here, and you do get a significant result. So as we found in earlier papers, we do not get a delta function. This is essentially momentum conservation that we're seeing out here. The overlap is non-zero over a range of intermediate state energies. Earlier for fusion reaction, we found that as we integrate over intermediate state energies, the integral tends to vanish. We find the same in the present case, except for very small values of proton energies. In this case, we do get a substantial contribution of low energies in contrast to a fusion reaction. By fusion reaction just means that where a charged particle actually overcomes the Coulomb barrier and goes through and undergoes fusion. So in contrast to fusion reaction, we do get a substantial contribution, and the difference is that in a fusion reaction, low energies are suppressed due to Coulomb barrier, which is not the problem here. So now we go to the other integral, which is the integral over the neutron. So here we have the neutron wave function, the photon wave function, and the final state. So actually, by angular momentum conservation, this is zero if we ignore the photon momenta in this case. So actually, we have to go to next to leading order. We do that, we keep terms linear in K2. Then we doing the integrals, we get all of this, and here is the radial integral. This integral turns out to be almost independent of Kn for small kn, and we are dealing with small kns in this case. And we find this to be about 10 to the power 10, 10 to the minus 11 in atomic units. With all of this, the reaction rate per particle can now be computed by inserting the proton and photon density of states and integrating over their momenta. We find rates of the order of 10 to the minus 19 per second per deuteron nickel pair for R0 of 3.5 atomic units. This is small, but observable in a laboratory experiment, in a sensitive laboratory experiment. It does require a high enough density of deuteron nickel pairs, which is typical, however, for the which corresponds to a typical loading in the low energy nuclear reaction experiments. We should see 2 photons emitted in coincidence with total energy roughly about 7 MeV. We have to account for recoil, we have to account for some loss, but roughly this should be the energy. Here I'm showing the photon momenta, photon spectrum for low energy photon. This one peaks at about 0.6 MeV. Admittedly, our calculation actually is not quite reliable out here. It is reliable out here at lower energies of the order of 100 keV. So in fact, we may have to, but that actually, if you go through our final result, that may make a difference of the order of 100. Still, that is not strong enough to change my qualitative results. Here I now provide the physical interpretation. At the first vertex, deuteron splits into a virtual state of free proton and neutron by emitting a photon. Energy is not conserved. This will just happen. The question is only, what is the rate of the process in which the neutron now gets captured? It may be 10 to the minus 1000. In that case, we say the reaction is negligible, or it may be 10 to the minus 20, in which it's possibly observable. The neutron is captured by X, and we find that the rate is significant only if the uncertainty in the position of the neutron is large enough to overlap with X. So this is the new concept that I want to introduce. The process takes place at significant rates only if the neutron de Broglie wavelength is sufficiently large to overlap with the heavy nucleus. How large? The distance between the two is determined by the Coulomb repulsion faced by the deuteron, which fixes its center of mass wave function and is of order atomic units. So what's happening is you form a virtual state out here, the neutron shows up, okay, but then it cannot probe the particle X unless the uncertainty in the position of the neutron is large enough comparable to this distance. Then it senses the presence of this particle and then can get absorbed. So we require the uncertainty in the position of the neutron to be order d, which is the distance of the turning point of deuteron from X. Hence, for small initial energies, we get contributions only from very small neutron wave numbers, which correspond to energies less than the order of 0.05 electron volts or less. So I illustrate this graphically out here. We have a deuteron out here. We have a heavy nucleus out here. The deuteron wave function is exponentially suppressed out here, but virtual states of neutron and proton pop up. And if the neutron, uncertain in neutron's position is sufficiently large to probe X, then it has the possibility for the reaction to proceed at significant rates. I have already mentioned this, but I mention again the approximations we have made. We have neglected recoil due to photon emission at the first vertex. This imposes some limitations on the photon momenta that we can include. This is fine for low energy momenta photons. I've actually checked this. This will work for 100 keV. No, sorry, not 100, 10 keV, but not larger. So at least, so for this one, in the graph I showed 1 MeV, so you just have a factor of 100 lower. So that is still not too large to suppress, to qualitatively change my conclusions. But we need to include, but we do need to include this for high energy photons. So I'm saying this again out here. We have restricted our calculation to the limit where the first photon has a really low energy and a full calculation is in progress. And then another approximation we made is that the modification of the intermediate state wave function of neutron due to the presence of X has been considered approximately. It may be useful to solve the Schrodinger equation in the presence of both P and X. None of this is expected to change the basic conclusion that the rate is small but observable. I conclude, the nuclear reactions at low energies are possible by virtual neutron capture. We have considered a simple example for illustration. We have shown that the order of magnitude of the rate is much higher in comparison to the expectation based on Coulomb repulsion. It is still small, but observable in a sensitive laboratory experiment. For simplicity, we have considered a particular transitions. There are a huge number of transitions possible, and that's why this is a very exciting field. These should be explored to determine if the experimental claims in this field can be explained. Thank you very much.
So if there are any questions, please go ahead.
Should I stop sharing? Maybe I should keep this, right?
Yeah, maybe you can turn on your video.
Okay.
Hello,
Just a
sir.
minute. Yeah.
So is the photon spin is limited to +1 and -1. So therefore, it limits the some kind of transition in the reaction, no?
Yeah. So those we have carefully considered. That is why I went through all these angular momentum rules.
Is there any orbital angular momentum rules of the photon
Say again?
also?
Say that again.
Is the you consider the spin angular momentum of the photon, right? And the
Yeah.
orbital angular momentum aspects of the photon is also there?
No. So we have not. So we have. So it is not carrying orbital angular momentum.
Okay.
Actually, okay. I'm sorry. In fact, the second momentum, the second photon is carrying orbital angular momentum. So here. So I said this out here actually. Yeah. So when you expand this and keep terms linear in K2, that essentially means that we are keeping an orbital angular momentum contribution from the photon wave function also. So yes, we are keeping it.
Okay. So I want to ask, is there any other interaction terms also present compared to the two interaction terms that you considered?
We have not considered other interaction terms. I mean, you can consider the Coulomb potential of some nucleus present in the medium, okay? So those kind of things we can also consider. So far, I've considered only these two interactions, electromagnetic interactions, which involve emission or absorption of a photon.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice talk.
If there are any more questions, I'm wondering. So looks like there are no more questions. So in that case, let us thank the speaker for a very nice talk. And Okay, so Pankaj, is there any way the audience can continue the discussion with you? I mean, any forum, for example, I think CMNS forum is one possibility.
Well, I mean, if somebody has a question, they can always, I guess, send me an email.
Okay. Okay, I think there does not seem to be any more.
Can I ask one last question, sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, here the particle, the heavy nucleus that you are considered, it's like anything, or is there any specific nucleus or that are in mind to do experiments?
Yeah, so here I gave results for nickel. I considered nickel.
Okay, sir. Is there any
Yeah.
special?
I mean, you have to consider, we looked at the ground state, and it had a simple ground state which we could sort of, it had a P wave ground state. So I could easily consider the photon absorption into that state. But I mean, there is no special reason really. There are many, many possibilities actually. And also our local experimental group is actually doing experiments with nickel. So this was convenient for us.
Okay, sir.
There are other.
Okay,
Go
sir.
ahead.
There are one more question. In this reaction, there are two photons are emitting, right?
Yeah.
So is there any possibility of there is a correlation among these two photons in this?
They have to be emitted back to back.
Okay. Means any other?
Okay. Let me clarify. Okay. So I have restricted my entire calculation to low energies. Okay. In other words, the proton energies, the nuclear energies, I mean, the proton energy and neutron energies are all small. Now, actually, the proton energy need not be small. This is something I have not done as yet, actually. While preparing this talk, I realized that the initial photon momentum I have taken of the order of like 1 MeV. If I take it of the order of 1 MeV, then the proton energy can actually, the proton momentum, okay, the proton can actually get emitted at the energy of the order of, what was it? I computed that. It is like 200 electron volts, okay? About 250 electron volts.
Okay.
Now, that is somewhat large. So, so actually, it is not quite right. I take back my words. It is not quite back to back actually, because the proton can actually take away a significant amount of momentum. So that part we have to sort of, we will soon finish that part actually. So the way it goes is that at the initial vertex, you can have a photon, proton, and neutron. So photon and proton can actually be correlated with one another with conserving momentum. And the neutron goes through with the small momenta and get captured by the second nucleus. And then the second photon gets emitted. So then there is no real correlation between the momenta of the two photons. So there is no correlation as such.
Okay. And since the energies of the photons
so
that
they
carry
can be in different directions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last question, sir. Since energy of the photons
Proton can carry
very low
a significant momentum.
Is the time uncertainty in terms of emission will be large?
Yeah, this is a hand. Okay, go ahead. There's another question.
Can you hear me?
Please go ahead and ask.
Can you hear me?
Unmute yourself and ask.
I have. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you, or you can put up in chat. There's something in chat. Let me see. If the professor can say something on the practical aspect of this talk, as in this laboratory prototype, if yes, he can comment. Yes, of course. I mean, so see, what I'm saying is that there is a huge piece of experimental, there are a large number of experimental claims which says that reactions take place at low energies. And now I have considered just these particular reactions which photons get emitted, although in the literature, the photon emission has not been studied in very great detail. There are actually contradictory claims. There are several scientists who have said clearly that they have seen photons in their reactions. Photons at energies greater than 100 keV, which should not be emitted if it is not a nuclear reaction. But there are other
You are not audible, Pankaj.
check whether indeed photons are there or not. I think that is very much needed. Now, having seen that something of this is possible, okay, we have come down from what I feel confident about is that in this particular process, we have come down from a rate which is 10 to the minus 100 down to 10 to the minus 20. If this has happened, I think that there are so many possibilities in this nuclear processes. There are so many transitions that are possible. So if we consider them, it may be possible to make contact with data. In data, people are showing a large number of transmutation reactions. The exact rate at which they're finding it is not quite clear at the moment. They have to carefully calibrate their answer and give us what the rate is. So that is something we are trying to do here at IIT Kanpur. Hopefully we'll get a conclusive result soon. And then we may be able to we are trying our best to make contact with the experimental data. So this will be to explain transmutations. And then we would like to actually carry out careful experimentation to test whether these high energy particles, photons at MeV energies or 100 keV energies are indeed emitted. I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, the question of the strength.
One last question. It means photon energies are containing low energies. It corresponds to the uncertainty in the times or hues. Is it, sir?
Please repeat the question.
I'm saying if the photons are containing the lowest means low energies, then the uncertainty in the time will be high in a kind. Is it?
Oh. Okay, just 1 minute. So, yeah, so here is what it is actually. So the uncertainty in energy is basically this. This
Okay, you're not sharing the screen.
Oh, okay, just a minute, sorry, just 1 minute. Just a minute. Escape. Yeah. So just 1 minute. I think I stopped sharing at some point, and I do this, and I share. Okay. Now it's fine. Yeah.
Yes.
So can you see the screen now?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah. So see, here is the key equation. The energy uncertainty that we are finding out here is given by this expression, which is really about, which is more than 2.2 MeV, because you need to go to the first free level in deuteron. In fact, the deuteron is just one single bound state, and the next level is a free level. So En has to be at least 2.2 MeV.
Okay.
Sorry. So the way to put it is that EI has to be minus 2.2 MeV. En is 0. So then the photon energy, let's say you take, whatever you take. So this can be anything between, 2.2 to let's say 5 MeV or 10 MeV or something like that.
Systematically, study as much as possible. After all, go systematically.
Yeah. So this is the uncertainty in energy. So the uncertain time is won by the uncertain energy. So that is where it's getting implemented. So
Okay.
what seems to happen out here is that this leads to a suppression factor, but this suppression factor is only a power suppression factor. The real suppression factor actually comes out here if you do not respect momentum. And then the other suppression factor we found was also comes up when we sum over all the eigenstates. And that seems to be related to the fact that the de Broglie wavelength has to be also large. Otherwise, the reaction will not go. So these seem to be the three crucial aspects that have to be aware. That what seems to be emerging from these calculations.
Okay, sir, I understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best for your future calculations.
Thank you very much.
Rajiv, you're unmute. You're on mute.
Stop sharing then.
Ankush, is there any reason why you chose silicon 58 as a test nucleus?
Oh, nickel.
Nickel.
Nickel. Well, yeah, okay. The one thing was that our colleague Rajiv out here and his group has been using nickel as their, as the material with which they are doing electrolysis. So that is so. In fact, the reason why I got into this was because of Rajiv's talk, where he claimed that these reactions are indeed happening, and he's been considering mostly nickel. Another thing was that nickel 58 had a convenient, state. So this is this P wave state, which I could, just directly consider. But that's not a very crucial thing. I mean, you can consider other states also. But nickel, something we have been working with experimentally here. So that's why I took it. But other state, there are many, many nuclei which you can consider. Others will also contribute. There's nothing unique about nickel as such. The only thing unique is.
So what you are in fact trying to do is interface between an atomic levels and the nuclear reactions.
Yes, exactly. So it is like, we are looking at atomic distances, and yet we are undergoing nuclear reactions. And one of the messages I wanted to say today was that this seems to be possible because a neutron has a de Broglie wavelength, which is of the order of atomic wavelengths.
Okay.
Atomic distances.
Okay. Usually the conventional wisdom is that atomic physics is EV scale, whereas the nuclear levels are all keV or MeV scale. But you are claiming that there is a place where the two things do interact, is it?
See, okay, let me go back to this picture again. So here is what we have is a initial
But
nuclear
you need to
state.
share again.
Oh, sorry. Just 1 minute. Where is this? Yeah, here. So, yeah. And here. Okay. So here it is actually. So we have this initial state, which is a nuclear state. Okay, it's actually a molecule. Initially, it's a molecule. So it's a deuteron heavy nucleus molecule. Then we sort of, invoke this very high energy state. This is really also a nuclear state. So this is the free neutron proton state. This is the first, see the neutron proton, this deuteron has only one bound state. After there's all free states. So this is this entire sequence of free states that I'm just showing one. You are probing all the free states of neutron and proton.
Okay.
And then we have this very strongly bound heavy nucleus. So it goes through this intermediate state into this heavy nucleus. Okay, so this is what I'm really saying. So initial state is a molecule, but through this intermediate nuclear state, which is a high energy state, it can actually proceed, into this very, deeply bound nuclear state. I don't know if that answers your question. If you can say what you mean, maybe I can say a few more words.
Okay, let me think about it. I think,
Okay, all right.
let me get back to you later.
Okay, please do so.
I get the general feeling. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think all the questions are over. Shall we end it here?
Hello?
Yes.
I started out with the wrong link on CMNS, Condensed Matter Nuclear Science News Group. And I wonder, is there a way to see the first 10 minutes?
Okay.
We have recorded this. We have recorded it. So we will be putting it up later, and I will put up a link on CMNS.
Where will the link be?
I think what we can do, Rajiv, is we can create something like NENR IIT Kanpur YouTube channel, and we can load it there and circulate that email in the CMNS group.
Yeah.
So we'll probably send an email soon.
We'll do that.
That would get a lot more attention. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for this. This sounds very interesting.
Thank you very much.
So the link at the CMNS site did work, is it?
No, that was the original one. Later
Okay.
I corrected it, but that was only 2 hours before the talk.
Okay.
Yes.
It's all over. No more questions. So this is the last sum. If there are no more questions, I'll be ending the meeting in a minute. Shall we end it, Pankaj?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. We can stop.